We collected the 5 most disturbing cases from Stephanie Sue's Rotten Mango True Crime podcast, and you won't believe how unsettling they are. One of the least known cases that Stephanie discussed on her channel was that of the Sampoong Mall collapse. To give some background information, in 1987, the Sampoong Group started building the Sampoong department store on land in the Socho district that was previously a landfill. The original plans, designed by Woosung Construction, were for a 4-story residential apartment building. However, Lee Jun, the future chairman of Sampoong Group's construction division, decided to change these plans mid-construction, transforming the project into a large department store. Lee Jun ordered the reduction in the size and number of support beams to make room for escalators. When Woosung Construction refused to implement these unsafe changes, Jun fired them and had his own company take over. The department store was then built with a flat slab design, meaning it lacked a steel frame or beams for load bearing. Instead, each floor relied on concrete columns. To make matters worse, they used substandard steel reinforcing rods, which were a lot thinner than legally required. Midway through construction, Jun decided to turn the planned 5th floor skating rink into a gallery of restaurants with an underfloor hot water heating system. This system added more weight and stress to the columns. The worst decision, however, was adding 3 air conditioning units on the 5th floor roof. As expected, cracks appeared in the roof due to the weight of the air conditioning units, and neighbors started complaining about the noise, so management moved the units to the other side of the building. However, instead of using cranes, they used pulleys and rollers, causing more cracks. On June 29th, 1995, the day of the collapse, the cracks had been spreading and widening, some reaching nearly 10 centimeters. Due to the alarming increase, the decision was made to shut off the air conditioning units and restrict customer access to the 5th floor. Structural engineers brought in to assess the damage warned that a complete structural failure might happen. Despite these warnings, though, the store was unusually busy, and the board, not wanting to lose sales, refused to evacuate. It was later found that most managers and executives had already left the building to avoid being harmed. The employees and consumers were finally evacuated at 5:50 p.m. when the cracking sounds were heard through the building, but it was too late. Moments later, the air conditioning units crashed through the weakened 5th floor, causing the already stressed support columns to give way. Each floor then collapsed onto the one below it in a devastating chain reaction. This event remains one of the deadliest building collapses in modern history. Over 500 people lost their lives, many were injured, and 1,500 were trapped under the rubble. Lee Jun and his son, Lee Han-sang, both part of the Sampoong Group, were sentenced to prison for their negligence. Several city officials were also jailed for accepting bribes to ignore the building's serious architectural flaws. However, for the families of the victims, these punishments felt inadequate, especially since the guilty party didn't even seem like they were regretful. Another shocking story that got a lot of attention on Stephanie's channel was that of Yoon Sang-yeop's tragic passing. In 2019, an incident occurred when Yoon, who was in his 40s at the time, drowned while on vacation with his wife Lee Eun-hye and her friends. Lee Eun-hye claimed that Yoon jumped into the water with some male friends, insisting to the police that they had nothing to do with his drowning and were unaware he was in danger. However, Yoon's family refuted this, stating that he couldn't swim and was terrified of water. Investigations later uncovered that Lee Eun-hye was having an affair with one of the friends, Jo Hyun-soo, who was with Yoon when he drowned. Footage from the night of the incident showed Yoon visibly afraid of the water, while Lee Eun-hye's friends mocked and taunted him for it. Jo Hyun-soo was then seen dragging Yoon's tube into deeper water despite Yoon's clear distress. The case got even worse when it was revealed that Yoon was struggling financially due to debts incurred while supporting Lee Eun-hye, to the point that he couldn't afford basic necessities like ramen because his wife was taking all his money to fund her luxury lifestyle. The couple didn't even live together, since Yoon lived in a small apartment while Lee Eun-hye had used his family money to buy an apartment in Incheon. Viewers were further horrified to learn that Yoon had searched online for ways to sell his organs to give his wife money, and he had gone as far as to contact people online about it. So at this point, you might wonder, why didn't Yoon leave his wife if he was suffering so much in his marriage? Well, messages revealed that he was desperate to end the relationship and even suggested breaking up in one of the conversations, citing his lack of money and overwhelming debt as the reason. Knowing what we know about Lee Eun-hye, though, it's not surprising that she didn't really care about what she was doing to him, or the fact that she was spending his money to the point of making her husband depressed. Then, to get a hold of his insurance of about $660,000, she plotted and managed to take his life along with her affair partner. Lee Eun-hye was charged with the passing of her husband and sentenced to life imprisonment, while her partner, Jo Yoon-soo, got 30 years in prison. With a video titled "The Horrific Korean Boarding School That Harmed Disabled Students," Stephanie delved into the pain and suffering that the students of Gwangju Inhwa School went through at the hands of their teachers and other school employees. Gwangju Inhwa School, originally established as the Jeonnam Deaf-Mute Welfare Center in 1961, was a school for hearing-impaired students in Gwangju, South Korea. The lightest crime committed at the school was the misuse of government donations. There were also incidents where fake students were created to fraudulently obtain government funds. The school also hired teachers that had no knowledge of sign language to teach hearing-impaired students. Then it becomes worse, as it was found out that the children were being starved by being fed scraps of food, if they got anything at all. The starving came to such a point that a female student started eating wallpaper. Once the student fell ill, one of the employees at the school pushed her off a building and took her life. The students were also harmed physically for things like forgetting their homework or their grades getting lower. That's not even the worst of it, as the people with positions of power at the school, especially the vice principal and the art teacher, would touch the children inappropriately, rape them, and then have the entire school staff hide their crimes, including the nurse. The crimes went on for 5 years, possibly for a lot more, without the perpetrators and the school staff never facing any consequences. The school's toxic culture was firmly rooted and maintained by the Inhwa family, who placed multiple relatives in powerful positions. They shielded each other's harmful actions and predatory intentions towards students until a newly appointed teacher at the school took notice of this and couldn't stand to be silent. Once the teacher talked to the students and found out about what they had gone through, he tried to tell the principal, the other staff members, and even the police, but to no avail. The principal was a perpetrator himself. The staff members either didn't know or pretended not to see anything, while the police didn't even take the accusations seriously just because the victims were disabled. Then the teacher went to the media and human rights groups just to bring more attention to the case, but this ended up with him being fired. The committee investigating the situation identified around 10 individuals involved, with official reports detailing 6 offenders and 9 victims. Initially, only 4 of the perpetrators were imprisoned, but all were later granted probation on appeal after initially receiving short sentences and settling with the victims during the trial. Thankfully, everything changed when writer Gong Ji-young published The Crucible in 2009, which was later adapted into a 2011 film of the same name. The adaptation sparked renewed interest in the case, leading to its reopening in 2011 due to public outcry, and had even more people coming out with their experiences. Former teacher Kim Yong-gil alleged he was harmed and forced to resign in 1968 after finding out about the passing of 2 students in 1964 who were buried secretly by the school's principal and vice principal. Alumni also recounted incidents involving the Inhwa chairman's son, who was the before-mentioned art teacher, coercing female students to undress and then drew pictures of them without their clothes on. In response to national outrage, the school finally closed its doors, and South Korea's parliament ended up passing the Dogani Bill unanimously in October 2011. This legislation removed the statute of limitations for crimes against children under 13 and women with disabilities, with a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Subsequent legal proceedings saw several teachers admitting guilt to their charges. The so-called punishment that the perpetrators faced compared to the crimes they committed was laughable, but the case managed to change the South Korean law for the better, so future victims can be protected to the fullest extent. It was through Stephanie's video on 2006 Cheongju curling iron case that the viewers found that the events that were depicted in the hit drama The Glory weren't completely fictional. Even though The Glory left a deep impact on its viewers, many were horrified with the mistreatment towards the main character when she was a student. She was beaten, had her money stolen, and was tormented by her fellow students. One of the scenes even depicted her classmates burning her skin repeatedly with a curling iron. What's really unfortunate is that the scene was actually based on several true stories. At first, Stephanie discusses a case in which a student was mistreated by 5 of her classmates for 20 days straight, just because she picked up a call from one of the tormentor's boyfriend. Once the victim alerted the police, the perpetrators then forcibly took her to an abandoned factory where they subjected her to a brutal attack that lasted nearly 2 hours, using any available objects as weapons. The victim sustained severe injuries to her jaw, head, and body. The worst part of it all was that only 2 of the perpetrators faced charges, falsely justifying their actions by claiming the victim had been disrespectful to an upperclassman. The ringleaders were sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention, while one received a shorter sentence. The leniency of the sentences sparked widespread outrage in South Korea, but despite efforts at reform, severe cases of mistreatment went on to pop up, one of which inspired the story in The Glory. In 2006, a middle school student was held down by 3 of her female classmates and was burned with a curling iron, sustaining severe injuries that required 2 months of hospitalization. This all started because the 3 female students thought that the victim didn't answer their question fast enough. For 20 days, she suffered relentless torture, where the girls would ask her for money repeatedly, and if she didn't give in to their demands, she would be severely punished. They used a baseball bat to knock her around, scratched her chest with a barrette, and physically assaulted her with fists and feet. Just like in the drama, they burned her arm with a curling iron right in the classroom, saying that they were checking the curling iron's temperature, which prevented her wounds from healing. They even punished her by peeling off healing scabs with their nails. The injuries were so severe that the victim had to spend 6 weeks in the hospital. At first, the school did nothing about it, and neither did the police until the issue got big enough. Then, the Cheongju District Court took decisive action by issuing an arrest warrant for one of the perpetrators, acknowledging the severity of the violence. Initially, the student had intimidated the victim into silence, but eventually confessed during the investigation. However, the punishment amounted to probation, seen by many as lenient. Additionally, the school and its teachers faced administrative repercussions for their inadequate handling of the school violence. The third student that Stephanie mentions went through the same thing. The victim in question was repeatedly asked for money by her classmates, and if she refused to do so, she would be punished. She vividly remembers a traumatic incident from her 3rd year of school when her tormentors held a curling iron to her arm for 5 agonizing minutes, leaving her with permanent 2nd-degree burns. They didn't stop there. They often threw things at her and physically harmed her whenever they pleased, to the point that it caused a tear in her iris. Perhaps the most horrifying ordeal was when she was forcibly taken to one of her bullies' homes and used her as a punching bag. The harassment only ceased when one of her wounds burst at school, staining her uniform with pus. Her teacher couldn't help but notice and take action, as the school formed a committee to address the perpetrator's actions. Despite being forced to apologize, though, the girls who made her life a living hell never acknowledged that they did anything wrong and continued to smile. To this day, the victim's remains haunted by the memories of what she went through as she trembles with fear during salon visits, cautioning stylists to avoid using curling irons too aggressively. Undoubtedly, the most tragic and shocking case that Stephanie has covered in her channel is that of the Nth Room, which was so horrific that she actually had to split it in 2 parts. But what is the Nth Room? It all started in November 2019 when renowned journalist Kim Won was notified by his employers at the Hankyoreh, a South Korean newspaper, that they had received a tip about a teenage high school student who was sharing explicit videos and photos of children on Telegram to his friends. This led to him and his task force finding out about the horrific chat rooms about the Baksa, or the doctor, who was treated like a god in these spaces. The doctor got his victims by approaching women who were looking for jobs or needed money, pretending that he knew how to help them, and asked them to join Telegram. Then, posing as a middleman for a modeling agency, he would ask the women to send some pictures of themselves, which they would do, either fully clothed or in their undergarments. The doctor would ask victims for their personal details, like their address and bank information, claiming he needed it to wire them money. The victims provided this information without much hesitation. He also requested revealing pictures of them holding their ID cards, which he used for blackmail, demanding more explicit photos. It was then that they would become his slaves and do all the horrific, grotesque things he would ask them to do. Take videos of themselves licking the dirty floors of public bathrooms, send pictures of themselves inserting sharp items into their private parts, take explicit pictures of themselves in public places, and many, many over things. The victims either added doctor's slave as a watermark in the video, wrote it on their bodies, or carved it into their skin. According to the journalists, the victims would be forced to take 50 to 60 pictures in an hour. If the victims refused to do so, then the doctor would try other tactics, such as threatening them or inviting people into their chat so they could all harass and humiliate the victim, until she eventually gave in to their demands. To intimidate his victims further, he shared their physical addresses in the chat room, letting all participants know where they lived. Exploitative images and videos were sold to users in exchange for cryptocurrency. The doctor's room even had different membership tiers based on payment, with some users reportedly paying up to about $1,200 for the most graphic content, which were shared in the VIP rooms. The victims were also violated, stalked, followed, and taunted in their real life. It was then that the journalists decided to focus their investigation on the doctor and found out that what they had seen so far wasn't even the worst of it, which was the Nth room. The Nth room refers to a series of 8 Telegram chat rooms created by an admin named God. These rooms were labeled with ordinal numbers, which is where the name Nth room comes from. God had targeted potential victims on Twitter, sending them a link that claimed their private photos had been leaked. When victims clicked the link, their personal information was harvested. This led to the creation of similar chat rooms on Telegram, the most notorious being the doctor's room, which gained widespread attention in Korea due to the horrific scale and nature of its content. We can't get into much detail due to how disturbing everything was, but it was through the journalistic work of Hankyora, Kookmin Ilbo, and JTBC's Spotlight that these crimes got attention and sparked a lot of public outrage. Social media especially played a crucial role in how the justice system handled the case, with hashtags spreading awareness about it. The doctor received a 34-year prison sentence in April 2021, while God was sentenced in November, was given 40 years in prison. Considering the amount of victims that were harmed in the process, this punishment doesn't really fit the crime, especially taking into account that out of the 260,000 men that were in the chat room, almost all of them are still walking free.